As we continue down the line, we're going to enter into the High Roman Empire. This is seen as the high point of Rome. And this is the furthest extent of the Roman Empire. You can see it goes from the Persian Gulf to the Red Sea, all the way to the Atlantic, up to Scotland, although they can never conquer the Scots, or perhaps just didn't care to, all the way up into parts to the Caspian Sea surrounding most of the Black Sea. This is a massive empire. And it's also entering into another period in terms of the development of Roman art. So, we have some evolution here. During the Republic, Roman art tends to be fairly realistic, although you do see verism when we're dealing with leaders or politicians. As we move into the early High Empire, so this is Caesar Augustus and Vespasian and others, they tend to idealize themselves because they're trying to control power. As we move later in the High Empire, so into the 2nd and 3rd century AD, what we find is a sense of realism returns, although oftentimes it's a stoic realism. It's sort of a realism that acknowledges that the emperor is suffering in many ways. And by the time we get towards the end of the empire, we'll see simplification taking place, as we have less artists working, less competition, and therefore less skill, because many of the artists are simply trying to survive, so they'll move to other fields. But we're in the High Empire, and we have the column of Trajan. So Trajan is interestingly picked by the Senate. He's the first non-Italian-born emperor, and he is well thought of at the time. And he will erect this column of Trajan in the new Forum. Now, the Forum in Rome is a place where you have temples and markets and the Senate House. Basically, it's your one-stop shop to do anything in the city of Rome. By the time of Trajan, that Forum is over 500 years old, and it is a mess. So instead of trying to clean it up, he basically goes across the street today and builds the new Market of Trajan, or Forum of Trajan. And in the center of that, he puts the column of Trajan. This is actually paid for by the spoils of war. It's 128 feet, or about 12 stories tall. And we have this colossal continuous spiral. It's based on some of the ideas that he would have gotten, for example, from Egypt with the obelisks, or from the steles of the Near East. And what we have is this continuous spiral running down the column. And that spiral shows two military campaigns. Interestingly, that spiral does not contain images of the nude, conquered figures, the barbarians. Instead, it shows that they've been defeated, but with a sense of respect, which is pretty interesting, very different from what we see elsewhere and what we've seen throughout history. So the enemy is not belittled. The band also gets wider as you get to the top in recognition of that being further from the viewer and therefore more difficult to read. Now, at the top, originally, there was the Emperor Trajan as a nude hero, looking something like what we see at the top right. But in Christian times, he was replaced by a sculpture of St. Peter in bronze. And this is not unusual. This is Christianity taking over Rome. And of course, they did have control of Rome from the fall of the Roman Empire, well, really from the very late Roman Empire, all the way through until the Lateran Accords by Mussolini and Italian statehood, depending how you want to look at it. The church really controlled the city of Rome for almost 2,000 years. So it's really a remarkable piece. And when we look closer, the whole piece would have been painted. So you can see here, we do have enemies dying, but when they die, they're in combat. They're simply laying on the ground. They aren't suddenly nude. There's nothing that says that they're barbaric. There's none of that. The Romans, we know from their armor, because it would have been standardized. The barbarians, you notice, don't wear standard armor. But even when we see this fallen barbarian here in the lower right, you'll notice that he's muscular. He looks like a grizzled veteran, like the sort of person that you would really respect in the fight. So it's really a change from what we've seen in the past, a really remarkable piece here.